Good afternoon, and welcome to CognitiveX ASP.NET MVC webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about an introduction to the Model View Controller design pattern and looking how it's implemented in ASP.NET MVC. It's going to be a basic presentation covering the fundamentals, and then we're going to be going into more depth into ASP.NET MVC and design patterns and best practices and other technological demos in future webinars. My name is Adam Greene. I am a software solution specialist here at CognitiveX, specializing in web technologies. I've been a programmer for about 15 years now, predominantly focused in web development, and I've been with CognitiveX here now for 2 years. So let's get started with our presentation today. Like I said, we're going to be talking about MVC, the Model View Controller. It's a design pattern first introduced in Smalltalk almost 30 years ago now. But it was made popular more recently by web frameworks such as Ruby on Rails, the Django, as well as ASP.NET MVC. For those of you who've been exposed to any of these technologies listed here on the screen, this presentation, in a lot of ways, will be a reminder and a refresher on MVC. So, what is MVC, or Model View Controller? It's a design pattern or a way of developing software that separates the application, or in the case today, website, into 3 main areas of responsibility. The first one being model. The model is the data that the program acts on. It can also contain business logic and data validation. It can be something as simple as a set of objects within your program. It can also be database access technologies like ADO.NET or Entity Framework, or in Hibernate. There's all kinds of different database technologies that you could use to form the basis of your model. It can also be web services. And like I said, it can also include business logic and data validation that is part of managing the data of your application. The second part is the view, or the presentation layer, through which the program presents data to the end user, and the end user interacts with the system. Simply put, in an MVC website, a view is the web page that is rendered and shown to the end user. And then finally, the third part is the controller, which mediates input from the view and/or the model and converts it into commands for the model or the view. When a user interacts with a program or a website, it's the controller that is going to decide what data to load and select which view to render that data with, and it basically handles all of the talking between the user, the model, and the views. So let's actually take a look at the basic flow of an MVC interaction. Specifically, we're going to take a look at a user coming to a website to sign up as a new user. So the user comes to the website, and like I said, they fill out a new user form and they submit it. The form data that's submitted is handed off to the controller on the web server. Controller then decides what it's going to do with the data. In our case, it's going to send a command to the model and say, here, save this new user's information. And then it will take the controller, then will decide what it's going to do next. And probably, if the user is signing up for the website, you want to present them with a thank you page or take them to their My Account page. And so the controller needs some information back from the model in order to be able to display that page. And then the controller is going to talk to the view engine and say, okay, I now have a model that I want to display to the user. So the view engine is going to select a view to be rendered, and the controller will provide it with the model. And then it will render, and the view will then render based on the model that it's been provided, in this case, the user's information. And it will come back to the controller, and then the controller will then present the view to the end user. And the cycle repeats. As the user interacts with the website again, the controller is contacted, the model and the views are brought in by the controller in order to render the view back to the end user. So why would you want to use MVC in any application that you develop? There are probably three main reasons why you want to, especially if you're developing any kind of enterprise class software, or if you're involved in a team with multiple people with multiple roles. MVC becomes even more of a valuable design pattern at that point. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why. First is separation of concerns. So design principle or pattern in which a computer program is separated into distinct sections that each handle one specific concern and exposes it through a well-defined interface. In MVC, this is achieved by the fact that each part of the system, the model, the view, and the controller, handles the particular function of the system. And each of them are very distinct and decoupled from each other, which then allows the different parts of the system to be developed parallel and separately. For example, you can have your web designer working on the view while your database administrator is setting up the database and setting up the views and the models, and then your programmers can be working on the business logic and the whole interaction system within the controllers. And this can all be done in parallel because the systems are separate enough that as long as you have, as we said, a well-defined interface, that if everyone has agreed on sort of the interaction points of your application, you can build a lot of it in parallel and integrate it at a later stage. The next one, reason why is what's called code reuse, or do not repeat yourself. MVC was designed to make you more productive as a developer. And the more things you can reuse, like models, views, and even controllers, the better. Even within a single website, you create a single model to represent a unit of data. We're going to, in a few minutes, take a look at a to-do list application. So you have, in that case, you have a model that represents an item in your to-do list. And that one single class can be used across the whole application. You can even create views for editing and creating the to-do list items, and it can be the exact same page. The only difference is which controller action will respond to the request to save or edit. But the view can be exactly the same. And over time, you can even, as a company, build up a whole system or repository of models and views and controllers that you can use over and over again. In fact, ASP.MVC has the concept of what's called areas, in which you can take whole sections of a program, like, for example, a user management system, and you can actually pull that out as a single unit that you can deploy into any website that requires user management. So the next reason we have is testability. Because the MVC system is basically decoupled because of that separation of concerns thing I was just talking about. It's very easy to test each part of the system in isolation from the other parts. For example, a controller can be tested without ever having to touch the database, or even fire up the web server in order to render the views. You can mock up the whole user interaction with the controller and set up all the different possible error states and everything, and you can test it all long before you put a face on it by creating the views and all the other stuff that go with that. So you can test things very thoroughly and very easily when you use a model view controller pattern. So let's actually take a look at an example of the ASP.MVC website utilizing these concepts. So the first thing you're going to do in Visual Studio, we're using Visual Studio 2012 Professional today. You can also follow along with this presentation using the Express version of Visual Studio 2012. We're going to create a new project. one of the things to remember is that we are not creating a new website, but we're creating a new project. It has to do with the way that MVC is compiled, that it actually is more of an application than a website. So like I said, we're going to do a to-do list example. So under Visual Studio C#, you can also do this VB.NET. We're going to choose Web, and then ASP.NET MVC4 Web Application. Then you're going to be presented with the ASP.NET MVC4 Project Wizard. There are three main areas of this wizard. The first one is the templates. Out of the box, Visual Studio 2012 provides you with 8 templates. I have 9 because I also have Kendo UI by Telerik installed. But the first 8 are the empty template, which contains next to nothing. It doesn't have any models, views, or controllers. It doesn't have any of the other setup that can be done with MVC, like bundles and routes and all of that. It's as empty as you can get and still call it an MVC project. Then you have your basic project, which still doesn't have any model views or controllers, but it does have all the other setup, like I said, bundles, routes, and there's a bunch of other setup that's done for you in a basic application. Then on top of the basic, the next one you have is Internet Application, which adds in all models, views, and controllers around the concept of account management and user management, so that you can build, have the basis of a web application that has ability to register and log in. The next is the Internet Application, which is the same as the Internet Application, except it's for uses Windows users or Azure users login rather than forms authentication. Then you have your mobile application, which is a mobile-only website done with jQuery Mobile. There are facilities within MVC4 to actually create a hybrid website with intelligent switching back and forth between mobile and standard web views. Mobile application here does not, out of the box, have that concept in there. You actually have to add more views in order for it to work that way. Then we have what's called the Web API, which is a new technology that Microsoft's created for not necessarily for MVC4, but it's in here because it is a model view controller way of creating REST-based JSON and XML web services. Though it looks like ASP.NET MVC, it's actually a completely separate namespace and can actually be hosted outside of the IIS web server. We'll take a quick look at a little bit of that today. I'm not going to get too much in depth into it. The next we have the single page application, which is a AJAX-based using Knockout.js, single page, dynamic update, all of the cool stuff like Gmail or Hotmail or any of these other single page applications. And then we have Facebook applications, which integrates the Facebook SDK and the Facebook .NET client to give you a platform to quickly get going in creating a Facebook application. And then finally, like I said, because I have Kendo UI by Telerik installed, I also have a Kendo UI-based template as well. The next thing that we have here is the view engines. Out of the box, you have 2 view engines. The view engine is what is the part of MVC that is responsible for rendering a view. Like I said, in our case, a view is a web page for an ASP.NET MVC app. There are 2 that are available to you. The ASPX, which is the traditional ASP.NET web forms markup way of creating web pages. For those of you who are familiar with ASP.NET web forms, there's a couple things to remember when you're using it here in a MVC application. And that is that some of the events that you normally expect to fire don't. They've short-circuited the rendering pipeline for speed, and just because some of it's just not applicable to an MVC website. Second, there is no code behind file. I believe you can add one, but when you first create, it's not included. And then finally, view state. In fact, any state that is stored into the page is not respected on postback. Any component that you have that you want to use that is dependent on view state or the postback mechanism, there's a good chance that it won't work if you put it into an MVC web page. And then finally, the second view engine that we have is a new one that Microsoft created for use in MVC4 websites, and that is the Razor engine. It has a much more compact syntax. It tries to be a lot more intelligent about what parts of your page are code and which parts are HTML. Today we're going to be using Razor just so that you can have a bit of an exposure to it. Probably in a later webinar we'll actually go in depth in looking at all the different functions and facilities within the Razor templating engine. And then finally, we have unit tests. As I stated in the beginning, one of the keys to MVC is testability. Out of the box, Visual Studio supports Visual Studio unit tests in MVC projects. You can also download and install other plugins that will add other testing frameworks such as NUnit and XUnit or two that I'm aware of. Today we're not going to do a test project. We just don't have time to get into it today. So we're just going to leave that unchecked, and then we're going to go ahead and create our new project. And you probably notice while it's creating it, in the lower corner of your screen, right down here on the left, you see a bunch of package names flying by. Microsoft did something interesting with MVC4 projects in that it's not a static set of files that are just simply dropped into a directory. It actually is using the Microsoft NuGet package management system to request a bunch of packages to be downloaded and installed as part of your MVC website. So every time you hit new on an MVC4 website, there's a possibility that some of those packages might be newer or have a different version on them. So just be aware of that when you're hitting new for an MVC4 website. It also means that anytime there are updates to the MVC4 packages that are used, you can simply go into the package manager in Visual Studio 2012 on your MVC4 project and tell it to update, and it will pull down all the new packages and updated versions. All right, so here is our MVC4 website template. We picked the internet application. So I'm just going to run it and see what we get out of the box. All right, there's our web page. As I said, you can. The internet application has the ability to register and log in. We're not going to get into that today. That can be for another time. But here's our page. So out of the box, we have somewhat of a theme already on our web pages. Now, we also have an about page, dummy data. There's nothing really on there, and a contact page. Again, dummy data. Something I want to show you, though, because this is an important key for an MVC website, is the path on the URL. In this case, it's home/contact. The about page is home/about. And finally, the home page has no path. As one would expect, it would be awfully hard to land on a website if you had to know the full path rather than just the domain name. So let's take a look at why that's important. If we take a look at the home controller, this is the heart of the website as it stands right now. This is what's managing our home page, our about, and our contact. And as you can see, the name of the controller is Home Controller. And there are three what we call actions. There's simply methods that return an action result. But there are three actions on this controller. There's the index, the about, and the contact. And those three correspond to those three web pages I showed you. So with a path like home/about, MVC says, okay, you are looking for the home controller and an action called about. And then if we take a quick look at the about action here, you'll see there's only two lines here. The first one, which is the view, is accessing the view bag. The view bag is basically a place where you can stick objects into that will then are accessible to the view. Mostly the only thing you want to put in your view bag is anything that's not directly related or represented by the models of your website. For example, we want to put a message on our page, so we just simply stick it in the view bag, and within the view, it's accessed and pulled out. So then our next line is simply says return view. We're telling the MVC system to go and find the view for the about page and display it to the user. So the question is, how does MVC know how to find the controller and then how to find the view? Because in the method call we have here, we're not telling it where to find the view to render. We're simply saying, give me the view for about. So how does MVC do that? Well, MVC utilizes what is called convention over configuration. If you open up your web config in a MVC website, you'll see there's not a lot in there compared to traditional web config files. And that is because instead of having to have a whole bunch of XML-based configuration telling MVC this is where your views are, this is where your controllers are, this is where you find everything, an MVC website is set up based on convention. In this case, there are particular folders that MVC expects to find things in. For example, your controllers are expected to be in your controllers folder. Your views are expected to be in the views folder, and even more than that, if you look, there are subdirectories of account, home, and shared. And if you look at the controllers up here, we have the home and account controllers, which correspond to the home and account directories. And then, for example, underneath of home, we then have three web pages that are done with Razor, hence the CS/HTML extension. And they are index, contact, and about. And each one of those corresponds to an action on the controller. So when we say, give me the view for about, MVC goes and looks in the views folder, the home directory, and then looks for the about HTML file. In this case, it's about.cshtml. It could be about.aspx, depending on which view engine you're using. Then there's the shared folder. That folder is accessible from any view that it's shared. In there, the most important file is your layout file, which is, if you're used to ASP.NET, that is your master page file. Ruby on Rails, it's your application. It is the layout for every one of your pages, except there are some certain circumstances with things that we call partials, in which they are not rendered in the layout, and we'll see those in a minute. So that's basically, the convention over configuration, that MVC expects things to be in certain folders. So let's actually create something that involves a model. Like I said, we're going to do a to-do list example. So we're just going to, we're going to have to stop our project. We're going to add a new item. And just to make things quickly, I'm just going to use an ADView.NET entity data model. For those of you who don't know what entity data model is, it is a object relational mapper that Microsoft has created to simplify mapping of data in a database to objects within your application, as you'll see here in a moment. So we're going to create a new one. We're going to generate it from a database. I've already previously created a database for this and loaded it with a little bit of data so we had something to look at. So, excuse me. I'm just going to connect that up now. And there's our items table for our to-do list items. And there we go. It's a very simple data object. It just has an ID, a due date, and a description. Now, one of the keys to remember with an MVC website, especially here in a moment, I'm going to show you the Add Controller Wizard. After you add any entity data models or any more models to this existing entity data screen, you have to compile your application for the classes within the entity data model to appear to be usable in the MVC website. So I just finished compiling that. So we're going to go in and we're going to add a new controller. This wizard helps you to create your controllers. It gives you some different templates that you can start from to sort of hit the ground running. There's basically 6 right now, which I'll show you in a moment. So we're just going to call this the items controller because it's going to manage the to-do list items. One of the ways of thinking about controllers is that controllers are a way of grouping together actions that are performed on perform their actions on the same model. So it's a way of grouping together, for example, your typical CRUD operations, which is what we're going to look at here. One controller manages everything having to do, in this case, with items. If we had users in the system that we wanted to manage, then there would be a users controller. So just think of the controller as a way of saying, okay, everything that's going to deal with this particular model is in here. So in this case, it's items controller. And there are 6 templates. There's an empty MVC controller, which just simply creates a controller with no actions on it, and you have to define the actions. There's an MVC controller with empty read-write actions. It puts some example actions into your file, like index and a couple others. And then there is the MVC controller with read-write actions and views using Entity Framework, which is what we're going to choose right now because we created our models using Entity Data Model. So we go and find our model, which is item. We have to indicate the data context class, which is to do entities. We're going to render it using Razor. There are advanced options, but we're not going to change anything in there because we want everything that's there. So we're going to hit Add. And there we go. Now it's produced for us a couple of different actions to manage our items. The first one is the index. And as you can see, this time our view call actually has a parameter on it. And we're telling it, give me a view that will display a list of items. In this case, it's also created down here under the views and items directory a bunch of views to represent the CRUD actions that can be done on a model, in this case the items. So this is the index page. It's going to display a list of all of the to-do list items that are in our database. So let's actually go and see what that's going to look like, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. Now, we haven't added our items as an item on our menu yet. So I'm just going to have to access it by typing in the URL, which is simply /items. And there we go. We have our scaffold. When you generate a controller based on the template that we used, it does what's called scaffolding, which is create some very generic basic pages that are meant to quickly get you up and running with CRUD operations, with being able to create new items, edit existing ones, display their details, and delete them. So as you can see here, we have that. We have the ability to create a new item. We can fill out the form that's created and hit create, and it'll give us a new to-do item. We can edit an existing one, and then we can get the details, or we can delete. Well, we're not going to delete at this point. So let's go back and just take a quick look at something. Like we said before, that the path on the website, like home/about, or in this case items/edit/1, when you access the edit page. Here, I'll just show you. Items/edit/1. That says I want to edit the item with the ID of 1. If you go under your app start, you'll see the route config. And this is the heart of where MVC figures out how to find the controllers and the actions and any other parameters that are part of the URL. As you can see here, we have the default route, which defines a template for the URL. As we saw, it was home/edit/1. So this, when MVC sees that URL, it looks here and it says, okay, so the controller is items, the action is edit, and the ID is 1. Now, in the case of the home page, there was no home/index. It was simply /. It was the root of the website. And that's because we have the defaults. And the default says if there is no controller, then it's home. If there is no action, then it is index. And ID is an optional parameter. It does not need to be included. So when I typed /items in order to display the list of items, the defaults here said, okay, I know that the controller is items. Oh, I don't have an action, so my default is index. So it actually showed us items/index. You can define different routes. If you wanted to have, for example, all of your controllers for admin be in the admin/controller/action, you can actually define a route that would allow you to do that. Or if you had particular actions that you wanted to simplify, like for example, if you wanted to say /bicycles, if you were running a online store, you can actually go in here and then define that /bicycles. The defaults are this controller, this action, and this category. So you can define all kinds of different routes to simplify how your end users can find your website and the items within your website. So let's go back and take a look at this index page. And we'll start taking a look at the Razor syntax. The first line we see here, it says @model. The @ is Razor's way of saying, okay, what follows is most likely code. In this case, @model is a special keyword that says the model that this page deals with is what follows. In this case, it's an IEnumerable of item. So this page is going to be dealing with a list of to-do list items. Next we have the and with curly brackets, which tells Razor that the code inside of those curly brackets is non-visual code. It's not going to be rendering anything that goes into the view. It's just there for dealing with variables and other setup or calculations that are not going to be directly displayed to the end user. And then the next we have is at html.actionLink. And within MVC, there is the HTML helper, which contains all kinds of methods to generate HTML code for particular actions. For example, here we have the action link. Because everything is based on controller and action, in order to get the URL to those, because like we showed you with all the different routes, and you can write new routes and as you're developing the application, and so that things don't break as far as how do you get from point A to point B, we have action links. And in this case, we're saying put out a link onto the page that is titled Create New, and it's going to be the create action on the items controller. You can just put the action onto the action link when the action that you're trying to redirect to is on the same controller. Otherwise, you can also include the controller name like so that it knows which controller it is that you're trying to access. So I want to show you something about what's called a partial. Now, a partial is, oh, actually, sorry, excuse me, before I go there, if you notice, I just wrote at HTML action link, and I don't know if you can tell on the webinar or not, but there's a light blue background behind this line. And that is the Visual Studio's way of indicating that Razor has identified this to be a block of code. Because as you can hopefully see, behind the HTML tags, it's just white. There is no color in behind the HTML tags. It's because Razor has identified that HTML tags is HTML and the rest of it is code. There is, however, sometimes where it's hard to tell, and that Razor has a hard time telling which is which. The most common example is when you start actually involving generics in the page. Like if you're trying to write this as a generic, see, it just messed up my code because MVC said, oh, less than string is HTML, so I'm going to make an HTML tags out of it. Well, that's obviously a failure, but that's okay because MVC has the ability, Razor has the ability to specify. And if you wrap the code portion of the Razor in parenthesis, then you're telling it, okay, what is in between the parenthesis is code. So it won't try to interpret the generics as HTML tags. There's also the opposite, which is if it's having trouble just recognizing stuff, like for example, if true, and we started typing, this is, well, it thinks that this and is, which are reserved words in C#, is code. Well, that's a problem. So in order to make sure that it recognizes things correctly, you wrap it in text tags. And that way that it recognizes what is inside the text tags is actually text, or in this case, HTML. Just a couple of quick things that if you don't know will be very frustrating when trying to learn Razor. All right, so, but I want to talk about partials. Partials are fragments of a view. For example, a full view is rendered inside of the layout, and it's written in such a way as to be a full web page, whereas a partial is exactly that, partial. It's only part of a page. You use partials to when you have common blocks of HTML that will be used across multiple pages, because one of the things we're saying is the whole thing of code reuse, or do not repeat yourself. Just a quick example here is that if you look at the create page and at the edit page, you'll notice that this block of code right here is replicated across both pages. You can see. To be more specific, this is the only part, because this one contains a hidden here that's not in the create page. So this part right here is identical across the edit and create pages. Well, we've repeated ourselves, which is not good, because if, for example, we add an extra field to this, we have to remember to change it both in the create and the edit page. So that's no good. So I want to take that out. And we're going to put it into its own partial view. And we're going to call it underscore item, because it represents an item. This is the AdView Wizard. If you are building your own controllers and you didn't do what I did and scaffolded the views and actions to begin with, but you start from a basic controller, then you're going to have to add views for each of the actions that you create on your controller. And if you right-click inside the body of an action method in the controller, it will also give you the ability to say add view, and it'll actually pre-populate the view name with the name of the controller action. So here you give it a name, and then you pick which view engine to use, and then you can create a strongly typed view, which is what we want to do here, and based on an item. And I'm just going to leave the scaffold empty. I'm not referencing the script libraries. And in this case, like I said, we're going to do it as a partial view, which then disables the layout page, because you don't use a layout page with a partial. So we're going to hit add. And as you can see, it put in the model tag for us to say this partial is going to be dealing with a single item. So there we go. I copied our code in here. So the question is, what do we do back here? Well, we just go at HTML.partial item. And we tell it which item it's going to be dealing with, which in this case is simply the model. Helps if you spell it right, model. All right, so now we just go into our create page, and we take this, replace it with this. So there we go. We are not repeating ourselves. So let's just quickly run this and make sure that the pages look the same as they did previously. All right, so let's go back to our list. And let's edit. And there you go. Page looks exactly the same, but we've pulled the heart of the page out into a partial so that it can be used across multiple pages. Another thing I want to show you is what's called display and edit templates. They also are partials, and they're kind of a neat thing to do. See here we have the to-do date as 6/4/2013 midnight. Well, I don't want the midnight part on there. So we're going to make a display template that will affect how dates are displayed in the system. So we're going to go over here. We're going to stop running the project. Because if you don't, there's a lot of things that get disabled in Visual Studio as far as the wizards and editors. So I'm going to create a display templates directory. I did it underneath items because I only want this to affect the items pages. And then I'm going to create a view here. Now, when you're creating a display or editor template, there's a couple of ways that you can name things that, again, the conventions of MVC will pick up based on the name. So in this case, I want all date time in the items, controller actions, any of the views related to those. I want the date time to display in a particular way. You can also name, there's all kinds of different conventions as to how you name your display and editor templates to control when and how they're displayed. For this one's going to affect all date time, because that's why we're naming it date time. And MVC will pick up on that fact that any time it goes to display a date time on a page, it'll use this partial that we're going to be creating. So it's working on a date time. Actually, it's working on a date time nullable. So we come in here, and when we're displaying a date time, we want it to display with a particular format. So what we're going to do is do this. Because it's nullable, if we needed to put in some logic in there that if the date time is null, we didn't want to display anything. Otherwise, we want to display it with a particular format. So if we actually run the page now, you'll see that our due date has changed to the new format that we specified. If we go in here to edit, though, our edit box here still has time in it. So we need an editor template. So we're going to come back here, stop the website from running, and we're going to go down here and we're going to add another view. Oh, sorry. First I got to put in the editor templates directory, because this is where MVC is going to expect to find this. So again, this is for editing any date time. Still a strongly typed view, still working on that same kind of data. It's a partial view. And this one's going to be a little bit more complex. There we go. A text box is a helper method on the HTML helper that generates the text boxes that you see in the web page. So let's run that again. And now that we have our new template for the editor, actually, I'm going to just do something quickly here. I'm tired of having to type items in the URL, and we're not really using the home page, so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to change our defaults on our route so that items is the default controller, so that now every time our website launches, it will come to this page as our home page. So let's edit, and as you can see, the time is gone and it's using the new date time format. If we go into the create new, it is expecting the same format, and as you saw there, you have built-in valid JavaScript-based and server-side validation for out of the box here. You can see that any date time, it is expecting it to be formatted as a date time. So there's all kinds of validations that you have available to you, like string length, required, range, is it a number, is it a date time, regular expression. You can even write your own. There's a whole validation framework in there that we'll look at in another webinar. So the next thing I'm going to do is just quickly introduce you to the web API. As I said, it's an easy and quick way of creating REST-based, JSON, and XML-based web services. So we're just going to go in here again, and we're going to create a new controller. We're going to call it to-do items. And we're going to switch it to using the API controller with read-write actions using NMD framework. We're just going to go to item, and we're going to add. Now, the thing that is different with a web API controller is it inherits from API controller, which is in a different namespace. It's in the systemnet HTTP namespace. And the way the controller actions are named, and as you can see, the result that's returned is also different. We have a get items, a get item, put item, a post item, and a delete item. The first part of the name of an action in Web API is actually the HTTP verb that's used. In the case here, the first one, it actually shows you the URL. And you have get, excuse me, is the verb, and the path is API/to-do items. And then the return result is simply a list, in this case an IEnumable of item. And Web API, based on the headers submitted to it, will then decide if it should render the list of item as either XML or JSON. It all depends on the client that's making the request. By default, I believe it's XML, but it will also generate JSON. And there's nothing you have to do except return the object or objects, and Web API will take care of the rest of it. So let's actually wire this up in our web page so we can actually see how this works. I'm going to be using an AJAX call done using jQuery that's going to pull back a JSON representation of the list of items. And we're going to use a technology called JS render to convert that JSON list into HTML. So I'm just going to paste this JavaScript file in there. And then we're going to go into our index here, and I'm going to make a slight change to the index. Actually, it's not a slight change. We're going to rip out just about everything and replace it with a new block of code. So here's our table as before, and here are the headers on the table. There was 3 to begin with. There's still 3. One of them is empty. But now we have a JS render template that is going to render the rows of our table. And then down here, we are pulling in the JS render script. As you can see, there's a couple of helpers involved here. We have the URL helper, which simply generates URLs based on the actions or whatever that you're requesting. In this case, we're asking for a content item, which is simply a URL based on the template that we provide. In this case, we're looking for the JS render in the scripts directory. We do it this way so that if we are hosting this on a path because it's a sub application, that it'll automatically write out a proper full URL. I highly recommend anytime that you are referencing sources for either scripts or images that you use the URL content helper to make sure that it always puts in the proper path. And then we just have a jQuery AJAX call to our to-do items Web API method. So now when we run the page, I'm going to actually bring up you can see it still presented, but it first loaded an empty page, and then through AJAX it populated that list. I'm just going to show you here because here's our API action, and here's our response body. It returned JSON. Without me having to worry about how to serialize that or how it works, I simply said return a list of items from the get items action on my to-do items web API controller, and it handled worrying about converting that to JSON or XML. So that is MVC. A couple of quick examples of some of the cool technologies and methodologies. Like I said, in the future webinars, we'll be going more in depth. If you are interested in talking about what you've seen today or about how CognitiveX might be able to help you in your next project, work with you in implementing MVC, or if you wanted any architectural guidance or code reviews to training and implementation, CognitiveX is here to help you. Here's our contact information. You can call us at 1-800-670-COGX. Email us at info@cognitivex.com or check out our website at cognitivex.com. If you are a web developer and looking for a new career, a new job, you want to change things up, CognitiveX is currently hiring. If you are in the Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada area, we'd be happy to talk to you about opportunities here at CognitiveX. Some of the questions, as some of you know who've seen this webinar before, this is not the original presentation. We had a technical issue and we had to re-record. But some of the questions that we had from the previous presentation was deployment. How do you deploy an ASP.NET MVC website? Because everything is based on convention over configuration, because everything's pulled in through NuGet as packages as far as building up the application, Microsoft likes to type the fact that it's X-copy deployable, which simply means that you can take and copy the whole directory from your development computer to your testing or production server, as long as you make some changes to like the connection strings for your database, or some things like that that would be different from machine to machine. You can literally just copy the directory, point IIS to it, and be up and running. However, sometimes it's not that straightforward, but it's a lot more like that than other web application frameworks. Another way that sort of help that process is if you use the web deployment wizards in Visual Studio 2012. That'll help generate a website that is ready for deployment, especially if you're using web config transforms. So yeah, that is it. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be more than happy to discuss how CognitiveX might be able to help you. And thank you for tuning in. And we look forward to doing more webinars in the near future. Probably we're going to be looking at next is the proper way of doing Razor forms and postbacks in order to protect yourself from being hacked. So look forward to seeing you in the near future. And thanks again.